Hello, I'm really glad you're here. On this channel, I share simple, quiet stories about life, love, and the little feelings we all go through. If that sounds like something you enjoy, don't forget to subscribe. Every subscriber gives me a little more encouragement to keep telling these stories. Now, let's begin today's story. The wind blew up from the valley into the hills of eastern Washington, carrying with it the scent of soil, old wood, and the quiet sweetness of young apples drifting through the early sun. The sky hung low and white-grey, like a heavy quilt over the rows of crimson trees waiting for a hand to pick them clean. On the worn porch of a weathered wooden house, an old man stood still, a cup of black coffee in hand, eyes fixed on the horizon where the orchard stretched out like a memory refusing to sleep. Walter had lived here all his life. The Redford farm built by his father, where his wife had said goodbye to the world, and where his son once threw down a shovel and walked away without looking back. That apple season, Michael was only 20. 18 years had passed. The tree Michael planted now reached the roofline. Walter still tended to it, not out of forgiveness, but because it was the only thing left after that last argument. The phone rang, sharp and sudden, slicing through the wooden silence like a knife. Walter frowned and stepped inside, where the old landline sat beneath the pendulum clock on a shelf.
Redford speaking.
Hello, Mr. Redford. This is Melanie Taylor from Columbia County Social Services. I'm calling about an urgent matter involving a family member of yours.
Walter said nothing. It had been a long time since he heard those words, family member. They sounded like something that used to exist, now lost somewhere in the dust-covered mailbox.
I don't have any family left.
According to our records, you have a granddaughter, Emily Redford. She's 15. Her mother was just taken into custody for domestic abuse. We're currently unable to locate her father, Michael Redford.
That name stopped him cold, like a dry snap of an old branch. Michael, the son he had shut out, disowned, and still remembered whenever the cold rolled in.
So, what do you want?
You're the last legal relative on file, if you agree. We'll bring her to you tomorrow morning. If not, she'll be placed into a group home.
He turned to the window where the apple rows curved gently with the land, breathing pale gold mist in the dull light. Everything outside looked still as a painting. But inside, old memories stirred Michael as a boy. His wife's laughter, the sound of old sneakers on wooden steps, and the emptiness behind the left bedroom door, the one that hadn't been opened since 2007.
Has she ever been here?
No, sir, she's never met you, but you're her last option.
A long pause. Redford tightened his grip on the receiver.
Bring her.
The next morning came grey as forecasted. The wind had turned cold, though it was only mid-September. Walter rose earlier than usual. He swept the porch, wiped down the dining table, and washed the coffee cup he once left untouched for Michael, still hanging in the cabinet like some stubborn ghost. At exactly 9:00 a.m., a silver SUV crunched down the gravel drive. A woman in a brown coat stepped out, holding a file. Behind her came a brown-haired girl, backpack frayed, hoodie grey, eyes colder than the morning.
Mr. Redford, this is Emily.
The girl didn't extend her hand or lower her gaze. She just stood there, staring at him like he was a statue abandoned in an empty field. Walter gave a quiet nod.
Hey.
Melanie smiled awkwardly, trying to sound warm.
I'll leave you two to get settled. The paperwork's on the kitchen counter. If you need anything, don't hesitate to call.
The engine turned over, the SUV rolled away, and the two of them stood on the gravel path like lone stones in a field just coming out of drought. Walter spoke first.
Come in. It's cold out.
Emily stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room like she was mapping enemy territory. She sat on the edge of the couch, didn't take off her backpack, didn't say a word. Walter stood near the fireplace, hands in his pockets.
Your room's upstairs, end of the hall. Window faces the orchard. It's gonna get cold tonight. There's an extra blanket.
She nodded.
What do you eat?
No red meat, no butter, don't like tomatoes.
Don't like people either, huh?
Emily looked up at him for the first time. She didn't smile. But something in her eyes shifted, not anger, not fear, but the strange recognition of someone more like her than she expected. The old clock ticked every 30 seconds. Walter turned away, grabbed 2 apples from the basket, and handed her one.
Redford apples. Sweeter than they look.
What about you?
I'm the opposite.
The girl shrugged and pulled out a chair. Her shoulders dropped, no longer guarded, but not quite trusting either. She just sat still, like someone preparing to serve time in a temporary prison. Outside, rain had begun to fall, each drop tapping against the tin roof like memories knocking on a locked door. Walter placed a cup of tea in front of Emily and sat across from her, less than 6 feet apart, but it felt like an ocean stretched between them.
No Wi-Fi here, no Netflix, no neighbors handing out candy, and definitely no one telling you you're special.
Awesome!
Her voice was dry, brittle as old paper. Walter raised an eyebrow. At least the kid wasn't scared of him.
What do you think I am, a monster?
I don't know, but my mom said you're the reason my dad never came back.
Walter let out a short, dry laugh, brittle like a broken branch in winter. He didn't argue, didn't defend. Emily went on.
She said you always gave orders, always had to be right. And if you'd loved my dad, you wouldn't have forced him to live out his life surrounded by a bunch of silent trees.
You talk more than your dad did at your age.
Emily went quiet. The only sounds were the steady rain and the ticking of the old clock. Then she stood, slung her backpack over one shoulder.
Can I go to my room now?
End of the hall. On the left. Bed's made. Lock the door if you want. I don't go into other people's rooms unless they mess up my bookshelf.
Emily walked off, each step creaking against the wood like the house was sighing under her weight. Walter watched her go until her figure vanished at the top of the stairs. When her door finally clicked shut, he exhaled slowly, like peeling off a layer of old memory stuck too deep to pull fast. He turned back to the table, took a sip of cold tea, and glanced to the right where an old photo still hung Michael at 18, holding a guitar, smiling shyly in front of the house, taken just weeks before he threw down the shovel and walked away.
Damn kid. Spit an image of you.
Upstairs, Emily sat by the window. She pulled out a bent sketchbook from her backpack and wrote on the first page,
Day 1. Grandpa's apple prison. No Wi-Fi, no freedom, no family. Smells like rain and sugarless tea.
Day 2 at Redford Orchard began with thick fog and air sharp enough to sting the skin. Emily woke at 6:45 a.m. not because of an alarm, but because of the steady, relentless sound of sweeping from downstairs. It was too rhythmic, too intentional, like a message wrapped in bristles. No one sleeps in around here. Taped to her door with brown masking tape was a note, breakfast 7:30. Then orchard work, no room service. The handwriting leaned slightly, but it was firm and certain, just like the man himself. Emily came down with her hair tied back in a hurry, hoodie wrinkled and hanging off one shoulder. Breakfast was already on the table: 2 fried eggs, a piece of burnt toast, and a few thin slices of apple. No individual bowls, no orange juice.
I'm not a hotel chef. Eat it or don't.
She said nothing, sat down, sliced into the eggs, and ate slowly. Walter sat across from her, reading a paper, sipping his coffee like it was some kind of sacred ritual. They shared the same room, but not the same moment. Outside, the work was even less pleasant. Emily wore gloves and learned to prune the apple branches under Walter's direction, but he didn't teach, he commanded. She wasn't used to taking orders, especially not from a stranger.
Cut lower. Don't leave the buds crowded. They're like that.
Why don't you hire someone or buy a machine?
People complain. Machines don't love the trees.
And you think I love trees?
I think you need to learn when to shut up.
Emily threw the shears to the ground.
I'm not your student. I don't want to learn anything from you.
She stormed off, leaving him standing among the ripened rose, holding a branch just cut uneven, scarred like an old wound reopened. That night, Emily went looking for the broom to do her required sweeping, and accidentally opened the small door under the staircase. Inside was a dusty record player and an old wooden box filled with vinyl records. One of them had a frayed sleeve, labeled in pencil June's favorite, 1983. She picked it up. Curious? Then smiled faintly. Her mum had never mentioned that Grandpa listened to music. Back in her room, she played it. The old machine crackled to life. A piano drifted out soft, slow, like autumn rain tapping on a wooden roof. Emily sat on her bed and turned on the small yellow lamp. For the first time, the room didn't feel entirely foreign. In the hallway, Walter walked by. He heard it, stopped for just a few seconds. He didn't knock, didn't speak. Emily knew he was standing there, but she didn't say anything either. She just let the music play, not because she loved it, but because she wanted to know, could that old man still feel anything at all? Day 6 at Redford Orchard brought rain all morning. The orchard work was put on hold. Walter sat under the porch fixing an old wooden chair, while Emily wandered the house pretending to look for something to read, but really just exploring every corner. She had found the floor plan earlier, 2 main bedrooms, and an old storage room at the end of the hallway, always locked, layered with dust. She tried the knob. It clicked open more easily than she expected. Inside was a small bedroom, dimly lit through a faded curtain. A single bed still dressed in aged green sheets. An oak desk pressed against the window. On the bookshelf were some classic novels, leather-bound journals, and a framed photo face down. Emily stepped in, quietly, not because she was afraid of being caught, but because she felt like she was walking into something sacred. The room smelled of time-damp paper, old wood, and the lingering presence of someone who left long ago but hadn't fully disappeared. She turned the photo upright. It was Michael Redford, her father at 18, standing next to Walter and a woman with a gentle smile. All of them wore work clothes, hands dirty with soil, but their eyes sparkled, the kind of spark Emily had never seen in her own home, Hope. On the desk, a drawer wasn't locked. She opened it. Inside were handwritten letters, bundled with a brittle rubber band. The cover read, Michael, 2003 to 2006, never sent. Emily sat down, her hands trembling slightly. She pulled out the first one and unfolded it slowly. The handwriting wasn't pretty, but it was steady. Son, today, I watched you stand out in the orchard for 2 hours, just staring at the early bloom. You think I don't understand you, but I was you once, head full of illusions, hands that had never touched soil. But you're wrong. Art doesn't feed people. This orchard does. Well, I'm writing this letter to say what I never could out loud. Emily was halfway through when she heard footsteps. She stood up fast, tried to hide the letter, but it was too late. Walter was standing in the doorway.
Who said you could come in here?
His voice wasn't loud, but cold enough to steal her breath.
I was just curious. I didn't know.
This was your father's room. I haven't touched it since the day he left, and I don't want anyone else touching what he left behind.
But why didn't you send these letters? Why keep them? Like you're still waiting.
Walter stepped in and took the letters from her hands, not roughly, but firmly. His eyes didn't meet hers. They were fixed on the photo.
I kept them, because it's how I survived you.
Emily froze. She knew who he meant, but it hit like a slap.
I'm not my dad.
But you've got the same eyes like the day he threw down the shovel and walked away. That look, like the world was too small for someone who knew everything. You don't know anything.
I know one thing: people don't keep memories if they really want to forget.
Silence. They stood in the forgotten room like ghosts of themselves. Walter gripped the letters tighter, then placed them back into the drawer.
This room is closed from today.
He walked out, leaving the door open. Emily stood a moment longer, then followed. As the door shut behind her, she turned for one last glance. She didn't know exactly where she'd been: a memory, a wound, or a gateway to truths her father never spoke. But she knew, from that moment on, life here wasn't temporary anymore. The next morning, Emily came down later than usual. The kitchen was cold, the dining table empty, no eggs, no sliced apples, no scribbled notes with commands. She sat down, fidgeting with her sleeve, waiting for something to happen more. But nothing did. Only the wind slipping through the doorframe, and the faint smell of last night's ash in the stove. She stood, stepped out onto the porch, outside. Walter was in the orchard, bent over a branch. The sun had just risen, its golden light dusting the damp grass like flour. He didn't look back when he saw her. Emily walked slowly toward him, keeping a few meters of distance. Neither of them spoke.
Put your gloves on. Got worms on the East Row today.
His voice was hoarse, but not as sharp as usual. She hesitated for a beat, then reached into her backpack for the worn-out gloves he'd given her days ago. Silently, she pulled them on, no protest. They worked side by side without saying a word. She pulled the ladder. He trimmed branches. She gathered clippings. He hauled fertilizer. As the sun rose higher, sweat clung to her back. Her hair matted to her forehead. But she didn't complain. She was starting to learn which buds were strong, which ones had to go. She realized apple trees had moods. Some were easy, some fickle, some as stubborn as people. When they reached tree 27, the lowest in the orchard, its limbs bent like an old man's arms, Emily muttered.
This one looks like it's praying.
Walter looked up, the first time that morning.
You think trees pray?
I don't know, but it bows its head, like someone afraid of being seen.
You're the first to say that about this one.
It wasn't a compliment, but it wasn't a dismissal either, and for Emily, that was enough. At noon, they rested in the shade of tree 14, the one Walter had planted with his wife. Emily drank water from the thermos he passed to her, her shoulders soaked with sweat.
I used to hate this orchard,
I know.
but now I think it's quieter than I thought.
Trees don't talk, don't judge, but they remember.
Remember what?
Who trimmed them wrong, who let their roots rot, and who saved them in time.
Emily didn't answer. She looked at the rows stretching out around them, and for the first time in her life, she felt like the world didn't need to explain itself, didn't need to understand her, didn't need her to pretend she was okay. That afternoon, while packing up, Emily picked up a leaf jagged, half-eaten by worms. She placed it carefully in her palm. and brought it home. Saturday afternoon. The sky had stayed overcast since long before sunset. Walter told Emily to bring the tools into the shed earlier than usual. The wind began to whistle through the northern trees, the sound of it rustling the leaves like someone breathing too hard. Emily looked up at the thick grey clouds rolling over the hills. She had never seen anything so quiet, yet so full of warning.
Storm's coming. Don't turn on the kitchen lights alone tonight. You've got no idea how ancient the wiring is in this place.
Emily nodded no argument, just a glance toward the corner of the orchard, where Walter's old dog Rusty lay curled near the shed. His fur had greyed, one eye was cloudy, and his left leg trembled if he stood too long. Since arriving, Emily had always noticed Rusty never played with him, but sometimes she'd sneak him a slice of apple. That night, the rain came hard and fast. The power went out. The house sank into darkness, lit only by the flickering oil lamp on the dining table. Walter sat reading near the fireplace. Emily curled up on the stairs, listening to the rain pound against the tin roof. Then, a low, broken howl. Emily froze. She bolted to the porch. Rusty stood in the downpour, trembling. The wind had ripped the latch off his kennel door. He looked at her, his eyes wet, not begging, but undeniably tired. She ran out without a coat, scooped the old dog into her arms, and dragged him inside. He was soaked, panting, smelling of wet fur and earth, clinging to her sleeves. Emily grabbed a towel, then laid out a rug in the middle of the kitchen for him to rest. She sat beside him, her back against the cabinet, clothes muddy, hair dripping. The rain tapped the roof like a metronome beating against silence. Then, footsteps. Walter stood in the kitchen doorway. He didn't speak, just looked at the two soaked creatures, huddled together in the dim lamplight. He disappeared into the living room. A moment later, he returned with an old wool blanket. Without a word, he gently draped it over Emily's shoulders, careful not to touch her, like he was afraid the smallest pressure might break her. Emily turned to say something, but she was too late. Walter had already walked away, and in that quiet moment in the rain, with a wet dog and a worn-down kitchen, something warm had flickered to life, unspoken, unrushed, but just enough to make her feel not alone. Rusty nestled his head against her thigh. Emily let out a quiet laugh. For the first time since arriving, she didn't feel cold. The storm passed, leaving behind the smell of damp soil, the soft drip from the tin roof, and an air so crisp it felt almost unreal. The next morning, Emily woke earlier than usual. She brewed her own tea, swept the kitchen floor without being asked. Walter saw it, said nothing. She didn't explain. Between them now was a quiet understanding, unspoken, but clearer than the day before. That afternoon, while looking for a broom in the storage shed, Emily opened the wrong cabinet. Beneath a layer of cloth, she found an old wooden guitar, scratched neck, rusted strings. She pulled it out, dusted it off gently, then looked around like a thief who'd cracked open a safe. Carved faintly into the neck was a message to Walter: keep playing even when the world stops listening. Underneath, handwritten initials J.R. Emily guessed it was her grandmother. She sat on the wooden chair by the window, cradled the guitar, plucked a single string. The sound was broken, thin, almost silent. But in that moment, she pictured her grandfather young, sitting under an apple tree, strumming a ballad for some curly-haired woman in a summer full of sun.
What are you planning to do with that?
Emily jumped. Standing quickly, Walter leaned in the doorway, eyes not angry, just still.
I was curious. I didn't know you played music.
You think all I know is how to dig holes and spread manure?
Pretty much, yeah.
A beat of silence. Emily gently placed the guitar back into its case.
Can you still play?
I don't play anymore. No one left to listen.
I've got ears, and I'm not deaf.
Walter looked at her, said nothing, then turned, walking back toward the porch. Emily watched him go. In his eyes was something hesitant, like he wanted to say something but wasn't sure he remembered how. That night, the sky was clear, the wind soft. Emily lay in her room, unable to sleep. She opened her journal, scribbled a few lines, then paused. A sound drifted faintly from downstairs. Guitar. Soft, slow, each note feeling its way through memory. She got up, stepped into the hallway. From between the stair rails, she saw the dim glow of a lamp. Walter, sitting alone on the wooden chair in the living room, holding the old guitar, head bowed, fingers sliding gently across the strings. No audience, no words, just an old man with silver hair and a curved back, speaking to the past in the only language he still remembered. Emily didn't go down. She sat on the stairs, arms wrapped around her knees, listening quietly. And in the dark, she felt her heart, for the first time in a long time, let itself soften. It was the first day of October. The sky was clear, the sun gentle. The wind brushed through the orchard like someone breathing calm, content. Walter stood on the porch, holding an old wooden basket, eyes sweeping over the trees where he called out,
Emily, grab your boots. We're picking apples today.
Emily stepped out from the house wearing the old flannel shirt he'd given her 2 days ago, hair tied high, a basket slung across her shoulder. She didn't ask where, didn't complain, she simply nodded. They walked side by side through rows of red fruit apples, round and full, like little lanterns, hanging from golden leaves. The scent filled the air, and Emily breathed in deep, smiling softly.
They feel like they're ready to fall right into your hands.
Not every apple's worth picking.
Like people?
Exactly.
They stopped beneath a tree, a low, bent trunk shaped like an old man carrying water. Walter sat down at its base and tapped the bark.
Your grandma planted this one. 1980, year we got married.
What was her name?
June Redford. Brown eyes, curly hair, and a temper sharper than fire.
Emily sat beside him, holding her basket. Wind tangled her hair, sunlight warming her shoulder.
Where did you meet her?
Gas station. I cleaned her windshield, and she told me I was doing it wrong.
I didn't think she'd be the one making the first move.
I didn't think I'd marry her, but when she left, I didn't know how to live anymore, so I stayed here, with her tree.
Emily looked down, fingers brushing against the roots curling above the soil, rough, hardened, but clutching the earth like they never wanted to let go.
Do you think trees remember who planted them?
I think they do, and if you stay long enough, they'll tell you.
They picked apples together. Walter showed her how to twist the stem the right way, how to feel a ripe apple with just the pressure of your hand. Emily tried clumsy at first, then steadier. Sweat dampened her back. Sap stuck to her fingers, but she didn't complain. In fact, she kind of enjoyed it. When she missed a step and nearly tumbled into the basket, she burst out laughing loud, clear, like a child. Walter glanced over. He didn't laugh, but his eyes held a brightness Emily hadn't seen since she arrived. On the way back, They didn't say much, but the baskets were heavy and the air felt light. The apples were at their peak. The rows of crimson trees burned beneath golden sun like a living painting. But Walter no longer moved with the same pace. He paused more often, bracing one hand on his knee. Breathing harder than usual, Emily noticed, but didn't say a word. Instead, she slowed her own steps, carried extra water, and sometimes bent down to pick up apples just so he'd have a reason to stop. That morning, Walter said he'd check the southern end of the orchard himself, the loneliest stretch. Long untouched, you see. Emily stayed behind, organizing apples in the shed. She had just rinsed her hands when she heard a heavy thud from the orchard, not the sound of fruit, not a branch snapping. She ran.
Grandpa?
Walter was lying on his side beneath a tree, one hand clutching his chest, his breath shallow, his eyes barely open. Sweat beaded across his forehead. Emily dropped beside him, hands shaking as she touched his cheek. Cold. She pulled out her phone, fingers fumbling.
911, please. My grandpa collapsed. Redford Orchard, Maple Hill Road, just outside Columbia.
In the ER, white light cast hard shadows across Walter's weathered face. Every wrinkle looked sharper, more fragile. Emily sat curled in the corner of the room, eyes locked on the heart monitor as if afraid it would stop without warning. A doctor stepped in, middle-aged, calm voice.
Are you Walter's granddaughter?
Yes.
We've found a mass in his lungs late stage. It's metastasized. He may have mistaken it for old age. Back pain. Breathlessness. But the truth is, he's been sick for some time.
Emily lowered her head. It felt like the entire orchard had collapsed on her chest.
Is there any hope?
Medically, we can only manage the pain now. He's declined hospital care. He said he wants to go home.
In the hospital room, Walter stirred awake. His eyes opened slowly. The first thing he saw was Emily.
You crying?
No, just itchy eyes.
Your eyes. Same as your dad's when he found out about your grandma. That look, the one that won't admit the truth.
Emily said nothing. Walter turned toward the window. Sunlight filtered in, but all he saw was a smudged pane and a grey concrete wall.
I want to go home. Nothing lives in here. I want my trees, my dog, you.
Then let's go home, Grandpa!
On the ride back, the car passed golden fields, an old gas station, and that winding country road lined with maples turning red. Walter leaned his head against the window, eyes closed, breathing soft. Breathing. Emily sat beside him, her hand near his, not touching, but close enough, if he reached, she'd be there. When the car turned up the dirt road leading to the orchard, the last light of the day touched the roof, where the porch lamp was already glowing like it had been waiting for someone to come home. That night, Walter lay in his familiar armchair, blanket across his lap, the oxygen tank beside him. Emily sat on the porch steps, listening to the wind weave through the orchard. Later, after he'd fallen asleep, she slipped into the storage shed, the one filled with the scent of rotting apples and old wood smoke. She hugged her knees, leaned against the wall, and for the first time let her tears fall freely.
You're not allowed to leave this fast. Not when I just started calling this place home.
Since coming home from the hospital, Walter rarely left the armchair by the window. The room smelled of black tea, ointment, and a silence heavier than usual. But that morning, Emily noticed something new on the table, a brown leather notebook, its first page still blank. Taped to the cover was a small note, scrawled in Walter's uneven handwriting, "The orchard years for Emily. When I'm gone." Emily didn't ask. Instead, Each morning she placed a fresh pot of tea beside it, changed the cushion on his chair, and opened the curtain just enough for sunlight to fall across the unwritten pages. Walter began each day by writing. His hands trembled, his vision faded faster than his memory bomb, but every word on the page was written like a harvest, each sentence, a season, each season, a chapter of life. He wrote about the first apple tree he planted with his father when he was 13, how he bled from thorns that day, but learned how to care for something that couldn't speak. He wrote about June, Emily's grandmother, the girl he met at a gas station, who taught him how to believe in love and how to laugh in winter. Between the chapters for Emily were letters he had never sent to Michael, his only son. Once a hope, now a stranger. They held all the words he never said aloud. I don't hate you for leaving. I'm angry you never came back. Every time I look at the tree you planted, I picture you still standing there, just quiet now. I saw your poem in the paper once. I didn't finish reading it. I couldn't, because if it was good, then I was wrong. But if it wasn't, it still hurt. One evening, while cleaning out the old bookshelf, Emily found a wooden box filled with drafts, torn letters, pages without names. She knew they were his. She brought it inside and placed it quietly on the table. Walter saw it, said nothing, pulled it closer, and kept writing. A week later, a third of the notebook was full. Walter called Emily over and pointed to the first page.
When I'm gone, don't read it right away. Wait, a year. When you're old enough to read with more than just your eyes.
But what if I need you before that?
He didn't answer right away. He simply tapped the cover of the notebook.
I'm still here, in this.
That night, Emily opened her own journal. For the first time, she didn't write to tell a story, she wrote to hold on to something, fading a little more each day. Today, Grandpa wrote about Grandma. I never knew her, but when he talks, I miss her, like we once sat together on the porch. I'm scared that when he's gone, people will become just stories, but if he leaves his voice on every page, I'll never forget. That afternoon, the sky turned grey, as if holding its breath. Emily was gathering bruised apples on the porch when she heard a car crunch over the dirt road. She looked up. An old silver pickup rolled slowly through the wooden gate. She'd never seen it around town. The door opened. A man stepped out, tall, lean, hair tied back, backpack slung over one shoulder. He stood there for a moment, then looked up, his eyes catching something that felt long gone, but suddenly alive again.
Dad!
He nodded. His voice was rough, like wind threading through brittle trees.
You've grown.
He's inside.
She turned without another word. Michael followed, his steps quiet like a shadow re-entering a life he had long left behind. Walter sat on the porch, the leather notebook open across his lap. When he heard footsteps, he didn't look up at first. But when he saw that familiar figure, he raised his eyes, cold and older than his years.
Thought you were dead.
Emily found my old email address, buried in the letters you kept. I didn't think it still worked, but when I read her message, I knew I had to come back.
Finally, a letter that made it through.
Emily stood behind them, unsure whether she was a spectator or part of the scene. Two men, same name, same broken edges, standing in the tension of something trying to heal.
I came to take Emily with me, if she wants to go.
I'm not something you just take.
Michael paused, nodded. As if swallowing a truth that cut deeper than he expected, the little girl he once held was now strong enough to stand without leaning.
Just now remembering she's your daughter.
And did you remember you were my father when you slammed the door in my face?
I didn't throw you out. I threw out the illusion you came home with a life with no roots, no land, no responsibility. I stayed with what I understood, silence and dirt.
That dirt was my wife, Emily's mother. And you knew when her mind started to spiral, when she slipped, everything collapsed. She used to be gentle, everything to me. But when I couldn't hold her together anymore, you stood back, judged, and shut us out.
I didn't know how to save you. I lost my wife, and with her, whatever part of me was still a father. Since then, I've only had soil and silence.
No one said anything for a while. Only Rusty's soft howl from the backyard like an echo to grief that no one had fully named. Michael looked at his daughter, the girl he had once left now standing like a stubborn apple tree that had grown without watering.
I'm sorry for leaving. It wasn't because I didn't love you. It was because I didn't know how to love you right.
And I'm sorry for letting anger drown the last of my son.
Emily stepped forward, standing between the two men. No need to pick sides, just needing them to be in the same place for once, for now.
If either of you still has the strength, sit down, please. Just once like a family.
Dinner was served on the old wooden table under the soft yellow light. There was white bean soup, crisp cornbread, and a plate of sliced apples. Emily set down the last bowl, then took her seat in the middle, her eyes shifting between her grandfather and her father, two men sitting across from each other, like opposite ends of a fire long extinguished but still warm with embers.
Let's eat.
She said it gently. No one responded. Only the sound of spoons clinking against porcelain. Michael lifted his spoon, took a slow bite. Walter stared at the table, unmoving.
Thank you for still giving me a place at this table.
Walter didn't answer, just sipped his tea. Emily watched them both, waiting for something, a story, an apology, or maybe just a look that meant I see you. But nothing came, only silence. Then Michael set his spoon down, his voice tight.
I used to dream of a meal where no one yelled, and no one sat silent like a statue, just family, eating together, like forgiveness had happened long ago.
Yeah, you lived in dreams too long. I lived in soil.
You're always like this, always older, so always right. But you never saw what was burning inside the rest of us.
I saw. You burned yourself, burned your wife, nearly burned the little girl who never got to choose.
Stop, please!
But the fire was already spilling.
You knew she was struggling. You knew, and still, you judged, turned your back. I asked you for help, just once, and you locked the door.
I didn't lock it, I just couldn't open it to another storm.
Emily stood, her small shoulders trembling, her eyes fixed on both of them.
I stayed with Grandpa because I had nowhere else. But I won't be stuck between a war that ended years ago. If all you want is to fight, I'll go. Alone.
The words fell like a blade. Walter looked at Michael. Michael stared at the table. Neither moved. Emily turned away, walked toward the door, but the door didn't close. Michael stood, voice cracking.
Emily, I'm sorry, not just for leaving, but for making you think you had to choose between us.
Walter looked up, his eyes red at the edges. He shook his head.
No, no choosing. You're back now. Stay. Both of you. Stay.
Emily turned. Her eyes were wet. She walked back and sat between them.
Then, let's keep eating. No one leaves this table again.
Dinner went on. No more silence. Not because the story was complete, but because pain, when shared, weighs a little less. Outside, the wind moved through the apple trees inside. A family began piecing together what was broken with cold soup, quiet tears, and the words no one had ever dared to say. Early morning, Pale sunlight filtered through the frosted window, falling softly across the worn pages of the orchard years. Walter sat at the kitchen table, looking thinner, frailer, but his eyes still clear. Emily brought out 2 mugs of tea, placing one gently in front of him.
You brew tea like your grandma. Weak, but warm. Doesn't force anyone to like it, just makes breathing easier somehow.
I learned from you.
Walter nodded. He didn't smile, just stared quietly at the weathered notebook. He opened it, flipping through the garden maps, notes on pest seasons, yields, each line marked with sharp, stubborn penmanship. Emily leaned in, reading over his shoulder.
This is the whole orchard, every harvest, every blight, even the years we lost, everything. But between those lines, there are things I never said. About Michael, about you, about what I regret.
Emily turned to a page he'd once left unfinished. There, in rough, fading ink, were the words, "If you're reading this, it means I've finally let go."
I'll take good care of this notebook.
Don't keep it for me. Keep it, if you need it. If not, let the wind carry it off.
She looked up. In his eyes, there was no command, only a gift.
I didn't give your dad a choice. I made the orchard his duty. And in the end, he walked away. But you, Emily, I won't ask. I'm leaving this to you like a seed. Plant it if you want, or carry it like a handful of dirt, to remember where you once belonged.
Emily sat still. In that moment, she returned to herself, not the rebellious girl, not the kid sent away, but a young woman beginning to choose her own path.
I once applied to an art school in Portland, before I came here, but I never opened the reply letter.
Why not?
I was afraid, if I got in, I'd have to choose, and I didn't know what was right.
Walter gave a slow nod, his gaze softening.
If you open it, and they said, yes, go. If that's where you feel most alive, and if you stay, don't stay because you think I need you. Stay only if this place still breathes in you.
Emily nodded gently, no words needed, outside. The wind stirred the apple trees, leaves floated down like quiet whispers. And inside her, there was no more war between 2 futures, only the quiet. Liberating truth for the first time. She was allowed to choose, without having to leave anyone behind. The evening wind crept in through the wooden window frame. Inside, the fireplace glowed softly, its light flickering across worn floorboards. Walter sat in his armchair near the window, body leaning back, eyes half closed, breath shallow but steady. Michael stood near the doorway, hands in his coat pockets, his gaze quietly fixed on his father. Emily placed a tray of tea on the table without saying a word. She poured 2 cups, one for her grandfather, one for her father, then sat down. The silence was so complete they could hear the fire crackling.
Tomorrow, I'll head to the hospital. Doctor's appointment.
Okay.
Not afraid. Just don't want to leave with words still stuck inside.
Michael stepped closer. He didn't sit, just stood. There was something in his eyes, regret, but also forgiveness.
You once said no one returns to the place they left behind, but I did. And you never left.
Walter looked up. He didn't answer right away, just gave a small nod like the sentence had finally untied the last thread between them.
I never knew how to keep a family. All I ever knew was how to keep soil.
And I never knew how to come back. All I knew was how to leave.
Silence again. Then, in a quiet, sudden motion, Michael dropped to one knee and placed his hand on his father's knee. No tears, just a bowed head, not in apology, but in surrender, a son returning not to be forgiven but to belong.
This orchard, it was never an inheritance. It was just my excuse not to say I needed you.
Michael nodded. He didn't look up. He didn't let go.
I know.
Emily turned away, giving them space, but in her eyes was something new, a quiet kind of light, for the first time. She wasn't caught between two strangers. She was surrounded by family. Before heading upstairs, Emily quietly unzipped her backpack and pulled out a thick envelope, the letter from the art school. She placed it gently on the table, next to the orchard years. She didn't need to open it just yet, because now she finally understood whatever road lay ahead. She wouldn't have to choose it alone. The next morning, a thin mist blanketed the sky. The apple branches were damp, holding beads of water like the orchard had just breathed through a quiet night. Emily sat alone in the storage shed, the space that once felt like a shelter whenever she didn't belong anywhere else. In her lap was the envelope from the Portland School of Art. She traced its edge gently, then opened it. Inside, an acceptance letter, a partial scholarship, and a handwritten note from the department chair. We believe you have your own voice. We hope you'll be brave enough to speak it through your work. Emily folded the letter and set it aside. No smile, no outburst, just a long, steady breath. Her heart wasn't racing. It was calm, like the answer had been clear, long before the envelope was ever opened. She stepped outside. The cold wasn't biting, just present. Michael was at the far end of the orchard, trimming wilted branches. She walked to him, picked up a pair of pruning shears, and began working beside him.
Still not saying anything, so you've decided.
I'm going in the spring, but I'll come back for the apple season.
You sure?
I used to think leaving meant letting go, but now I know. Roots don't need to follow the trunk. They just need a place to return to.
Michael looked at her, his eyes filled with a wordless pride. He rested a hand on her shoulder, not like a father who once left, but like someone learning how to stay.
He'd be proud, so proud.
I think so too.
They continued trimming. The dry branches dropped to the earth, light as breath, like a past finally accepted, no longer heavy. Sunday morning. The sky was a clear blue, not a single cloud in sight. The cold was just enough to make you shiver, stepping outside. Walter sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, gazing out at the orchard, like always. Emily brought him a cup of hot tea, placing it in his hand without needing to ask. He took a sip, barely more than a breath, just to take in the scent. He didn't say anything. Michael stepped out from the house, holding an old radio. He turned on a soft jazz tune, distant, mellow, like a memory dissolving in mist.
I like this one. Back when I was young, I used to play it every winter, in the shed, with a half bottle of whiskey and a kerosene lamp.
Emily sat beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. Michael took the step below. No one spoke. They just listened to the music, the wind, the rhythm of time moving on one beat at a time, unrushed, without holding back. Walter slowly closed his eyes, his breathing softened.
If I go now, I'll still make it in time for winter.
Emily took his hand. It was growing cold, but it squeezed back just a little as if to say, I know, and I'm ready. There were no tears, only stillness, like the season's first snowflake falling and vanishing. That afternoon, Michael closed the old barn door. Emily placed the orchard years on the table, flipped to the final blank page, and wrote a single line, her handwriting tilted and fine roots never die. They just wait for when we're brave enough to return. Winter passed slowly, the rain steady, the wind quiet. The orchard slept beneath fog and frost-soaked soil. Walter was gone, but his name remained in the harvest log, in the old photo above the kitchen sink, and in the way Michael placed his hand on a tree trunk before trimming it. Emily woke early each morning. No more slow footsteps on the wooden floor, no more kettle whistling, but the habit of brewing 2 cups of tea lingered only now. One sat beside the picture frame, not the chair. One morning in mid-February, Emily stood before Tree, the place where she'd once held Rusty in the rain. She crouched, gently pulling weeds from the roots. Michael stepped over and handed her a pair of gloves.
You don't have to do this alone.
I'm not alone, just still getting used to doing it with someone.
They worked the orchard together. Michael showed her how to spot waterlogged roots, how to cut deep enough to keep the rot from spreading. Emily took notes in the margin of her notebook, and beside the blank space where Grandpa used to write, she added a small flower symbol. That night, as the rain began to tap gently against the tin roof, Emily sat in the shed, reading a letter from Portland Final Instructions for the spring term. She paused, then pulled out a small wooden tag from the drawer, property of W. Redford, 1958. She held it in her hand and smiled to herself. She wasn't sure if she'd take it with her as a keepsake or leave it behind as a promise to return. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid to leave, because she no longer belonged here by default. She belonged here by choice. Late May. The Portland Art School courtyard was bright with red maple blossoms. Emily stood in the center of campus, holding a stack of sketch papers, a light sheen of sweat on her forehead. She smiled not because her drawings had been praised, but because she recognized a very specific scent, young apples and damp wood. That evening, she called home.
How's tree 27?
It's fruiting slightly off to the left, but still standing strong.
Like Grandpa?
Like all of this family.
Mid-June, she returned, stepping off the bus with her art bags in hand. She carried a small wooden box, an early graduation gift from her mentor, a set of engraved dip pens. Michael was waiting at the start of the dirt road. No hug, just a nod, but in his eyes was something different. He no longer saw Emily as a child needing protection, but as someone equal, carrying forward their shared memory. The orchard hummed with cicada song. Rusty was gone, but the magnolia tree Emily planted by his grave bloomed pristine white. Emily stepped into the old shed, laid sketch paper on the floor. She began her new project, a map of scent and season, recreating moments in the orchard not through painting, but through traces, fragrances, and sound. On the cover, she wrote for Grandpa, who never knew how to hold, but learned how to stay. Late afternoon, wind rustled through the porch. On the table sat 2 cups of tea, one still steaming, the other cooling. But no one touched the cold cup. It remained honoring a space held not out of regret, but because some people, even when gone, still always sit there. Thank you for listening to the story. If you have any thoughts, feel free to share them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Once again, I'm really happy to have you here. Don't forget to subscribe so we can keep sharing more stories about life together. Take care and see you next time.